Hello everyone, Xeno What If here. Bring in part 6 of What If the Transformers crash landed in Code Geass. Link down description of the fanfiction of this What If. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Scrap heap. Bumblebee and Bulkhead both trudged through the frigid blizzard winds and snowy grounds within the Arctic. This seemed the last place these two Autobots would be, considering they've been focusing on organizing a rebellion in Japan, but the ARC scanners had picked up an odd reading some time ago. It was definitely Cybertronian, yet they couldn't tell whether it was Autobot or Decepticon, so two of them were sent via ground bridge to find out. Are we there yet? Bumblebee asked, not liking the tundra conditions one bit. No, not yet, Bulkhead replied as they continued to trudge with the biggest Autobot holding a scanner. But it should be just past this ridge, Bumblebee. Bulk and Bee both walked toward the ridge before they jumped and slid to the ground below. They looked around and the only thing they saw was more snow and ice. I don't get it. Bulkhead looked at his scanner again. These readings are off the meter. Bumblebee looked around for a bit when he spotted something. Hey, I think I found it. He caught Bulkhead's attention as they looked downward to a frozen patch of water where a large, round, and dark metal canister was completely insulated in the ice underneath. The two Autobots were able to haul the frozen canister out of the ice and back to the Ark via ground bridge. Now they were in the infirmary getting checked by the team's medic and his minicon assistant. I told you Doc, we're fine. Bulkhead insisted as he tried to pull two cables off his chest connecting to a machine looking like a human's IV with Bumblebee hooked up to the same machine, and attempted to stand up, until Ratchet stopped him. The only way to be certain you're fine, Bulkhead, is to endure standard defrosting procedure. Ratchet told him, you know prolonged exposure to sub-zero conditions can cause permanent system damage. Fix-It rolled up with a small scanner in his own hands. While the procedure itself can be taxing, I am pleased to report that neither you nor Bumblebee appear to have sustained any sort of damage. He glitched a bit. Optimus walked into the infirmary. Ratchet, Fix-It, have you learned anything more about our Arctic find? Not yet, Ratchet answered. The pod can't be opened while it's frozen solid. However, it should be thawed out within 24 hours, by then, we should learn more of its origin. Fix-It added. The massive pod was currently being held in one of the Ark's cargo bays, with a large assortment of massive heat lamps gathered around in an attempt to melt the ice off. Already, about a third of it was thawed out. However, there was some kind of noise coming from the inside. A pounding sound that continued until a tiny crack was seen on the pod's surface. The crack exploded as a tiny metallic claw shot out. The next day, Ratchet opened a portal in the ground bridge bay as Optimus, Cliffjumper, and RC prepared themselves. RC, Cliffjumper, and I will search for any clue which might explain the origin of our Arctic find. The Autobot leader said. Only until your sensors sound. Ratchet replied as he held a scanner in his hands and aimed the remote settings at his three colleagues. The Autobot logos on all three of them lit with a blue light briefly. Remember, once your core temperature drops into the blue zone, system failures aren't likely, they're imminent. So, no chance of us getting a tan while we're out, huh? Cliffjumper joked, resulting in Ratchet groaning in annoyance. Yeah, I know. Don't stay too long or else we'll be botsiciles. Got it. Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and Ironhide are returning now. Fix-It informed, along with Zero and several other Black Knights. With a remote activation, a second ground bridge portal opened up in the bay as the three Autobots drove out. The second portal closed shortly after as several of the Black Knights and their leader, including their newest member Rai, all got out, and the three bots transformed into their natural forms. Miss us Doc, Tamaki joked. Ratchet looked a bit annoyed. Don't you all have something to do? You mean talk with all those other rebel groups about joining up with us? Inoue questioned almost irritably with hands on her hips. Already done. The old Yamato Alliance guys are finishing everything up with them. So yeah, we got nothing else to do. Tamaki added. So where are you guys going? Colin asked, on the account of the open ground bridge portal. Tag team, Colin. RC replied. Our term for exploration duty. Exploration, huh? Tamaki seemed to like the idea. Beautiful day. Wouldn't mind riding around in a cool-looking motorcycle, picking up a girl or two, rather than just being stuck here in a sunken ship. Arctic exploration duty. RC said in a tone similar to a mother disciplining a naughty child. In a sunken ship where it's warm. Tamaki quickly said as he and most of the other Black Knights, including Colin, followed Bumblebee out of the Groundbridge Bay. The Arctic. Why go all the way out there? Ogi asked as he stood along with Zero and Rai. Last night we picked up a Cybertronian pod frozen up there. We brought it back and we're gonna see if we find anything else. Cliffjumper answered. What did you find? Zero asked, with his interest piqued. Weapons. Energon. Don't know. Cliff shrugged. We're still waiting for it to thaw out. The Arctic, huh? Rai walked up. You know, I wouldn't mind seeing some snow. Considering I'm not sure if I ever have once in my life before. He said in a light humor tone, joking about his amnesia. I would invite you to join, Rai. But the conditions are much too extreme, even for we Autobots. Optimus said in a sympathetic tone. Oh, okay. I get it. Rai nodded. They were about to turn and walk into the porta. But, I will bring you back a snowball. Optimus offered. That'd be cool, thanks. Rai said with a smile. Yeah, that would be cool, wouldn't it? Cliffjumper joked. RC groaned as she shook her head. Even Zero found that joke to be a bit stale as the Autobot trio turned around to walk into the swirling portal. Rai ran to catch up with Bumblebee and the rest of the Black Knights along with Ogi while Zero stayed with Ironhide, Fix-It, Bulkhead, and Ratchet to see the other three Autobots leave just as the portal closed. Transport complete, Fix-It reported. However, a second after that, the manual control system for the ground bridge seemed to short-circuit and even slightly explode, catching the attention of the other three Autobots and even Zero himself. By the Allspark, Ratchet exclaimed as the others hurried themselves to Ratchet's position. What was that? Ratchet, what happened? Ironhide exclaimed as Ratchet tried to assess the malfunctioning console, even pulling up and down on the manual lever. Some sort of short-circuit in the ground bridge controls. The Autobot medic answered. Well, what does that mean for Optimus and the others? Bulkhead asked with worry, and even Zero gave a slight gasp at the possibility of something bad happening to them. I have their life signals isolated. Fix-It rolled his way down a diagonal ramp down to the ground with the remote in his servos. They appear to have made it through just fine. What about bringing them back? Zero asked. That is the problem, isn't it? Ratchet said. I need some heavy lifting. He pointed to the floor. Remove those floor panels. Chop chop. Bulkhead and Ironhide quickly got to work on the floor. Is there anything I can do? Zero asked. Your human body can't do much in terms of heavily lifting, but see if you can help Fix-It find a remote bypass for the ground bridge system. Ratchet told him. Underneath his mask, Lelouch narrowed his eyes at the subtle comment about his human features, but he knew Ratchet was right. Not much he can do with manual labor, especially on an Autobot level, so he walked toward Fix-It and looked at the remote he was holding. Sorry about him. Fix-It apologized for Ratchet. He means no offense, it's just. It's fine, not the worst way I've been insulted or disgraced. Just tell me what to do. Zero told Fix-It. Bumblebee and the 8 Black Knights had entered the Ark's bridge, specifically the living area that was set up as several of the knights sat down and Tamaki turned on the TV. Rai was among the last to climb up the ladder as he could hardly believe it. It was only a couple of days since he found out Lelouch was Zero, and it was by complete accident. Not only that, he also found out his so-called car was Bumblebee in disguise and watching over him. He also learned about CC and Lelouch's own Geass ability. Of course, Rai promised to keep all of that a secret as it was the least he could do for the former prince, considering he gave a place for Rai to live. He looked at the uniform he was wearing, a standard uniform of the Black Knights, with the Autobot Black Knight logo on the shoulder of the suit. He stood among not just rebels fighting for their nation's freedom, but even literal titans, and they seemed to treat him like a normal person. Even the Autobots seemed alright with it. He remembered when he first met them, the day after he found out about Lelouch being Zero. He, Bumblebee, and CC both took Rai to the Ark where he met all the Autobots face to face. Being that close to all of them, especially Optimus Prime, no words could describe the amazing feels he had. After Lelouch told the Autobots what he told Rai, they told him about the Decepticons and how they are Britannia's true masterminds, as well as a bit about the war for Cybertron. Hearing what the Autobots went through just made him all the more eager to fight with them. They lost just as much as the people in the Black Knights all did, if not more. Now here he stood, a Black Knight himself, and he silently vowed to do whatever it takes to help these people and save this world from Britannia and the Decepticons. Hey kid, what are you doing all standing around like that? Come on, sit down and chill with us. Tamaki urged with a friendly smile. Yeah, okay. Rai was slightly startled out of his thoughts as he sat down on a couch, on a spot in between Ogi and Colin that they saved for him. So, how does it feel to be a Black Knight? Ogi asked. Pretty amazing. Rai answered honestly. If I heard that one of the hostages we saved during the hotel jacking would be so inspired that he'd actually want to join us, I wouldn't believe it. Ogi said. Kinda like how you're fighting with alien robots that transform into cars. Rai jokingly asked. You know, I'm standing right here, right? Bumblebee told them as he stood behind them. Sorry B. Rai waved. Hey, how come you can understand him? Tamaki asked. Zero gave me a translator. Rai pointed to a small device in his right ear. What? Tamaki exclaimed. Why do you get a translator while the rest of us don't? What are you talking about? I got one. Colin pointed to her own ear device as well. Yeah, I got one too. Ogi showed his. Same here. Inoue pointed to hers. Yep. Minami also shown. The others showed off their translators as well, much to Tamaki's surprise. Well, how come I don't have one? How the hell did you guys get yours? We asked. Colin said with lowered eyebrows. Tamaki sat dumbfounded. That's it. Yep. You want one, all you gotta do is ask. Fix-It can fix one up for you in no time. Bumblebee said. He said Fix-It can make one easy. Yoshida translated for Bumblebee. Tamaki said nothing, slapped his hand against his face. As Inoue took the remote and began to surf the channels on the television, Rai stood up and began to walk away. Hey, Rai, where are you going? Colin asked. He shrugged. Just gonna wander and explore. If this is our base, I'm gonna see what it's like. Just try not to wander off too far. This place is big, it's easy to get lost if you don't have a map. Bumblebee advised. Yeah, got it, Rai said as he climbed down the ladder and began to walk out of the bridge, all the while Colin looked toward him with concern. Flashback. Rai. Yeah, hi Colin. Rai waved nervously as Zero stood next to him and Colin looked almost dumbfounded. I take it you know him? Zero asked. Yeah, he's my classmate. Colin stuttered out, still not over her surprise. That is what he told me as well. Zero said, although this surprise would be expected. As Lelouch told Rai about his Geass and him being Zero, he also told Rai about Colin and her true identity among the Black Knights, while that sickly and frail girl at Ashford was just a facade. Of course, Lelouch also told Rai that Colin doesn't know about him being Zero, so Rai reluctantly agreed not to tell Colin that. Yeah, but why is he here? He stumbled onto me and Bumblebee in the ghetto. Zero explained. He came to me with the wish to join the Black Knights. He was so insistent I couldn't shoot him down. I don't. Why, Rai, why would? Colin still couldn't get over her surprise. Because I can't stand the way the world is. Rai began. A world where people are constantly stepped on just because of what place they're from. A world where bad people can do whatever they want and get away with it, even if it means killing innocent people. I can't live in that sort of world. I wanna do everything I can to change it. Colin, what you and Zero, and all those Autobots and Black Knights are doing is nothing short of amazing. And I want to be a part of that. Colin felt almost moved by that speech. She knew how Rai felt about Britannia as she's heard him openly voice his disdain towards the Empire before, but at the same time, if he joins the Black Knights, he'd be putting his life in danger, so she was naturally concerned. Rai, listen. This isn't like joining some kind of club back at school or anything. Colin said. You are joining a rebellion. The choices you make could be matters of life and death, that includes your own life. You might have known me only as that frail and sickly Colin Statfeld, but I still see you as a friend. And I don't want you to get hurt, or worse, end up getting killed. Rai sighed. Colin, I know the risks. Believe me, Zero made that quite clear. But I made up my mind. And for the record, I like the real rebellious you a lot more than the frail fake you. Colin was a bit surprised that he was so acceptant of her. Zero placed a hand on Ray's shoulder as he spoke. Don't worry Colin, I won't have Rai placed in a position that will put his life in danger. Not until he has proper training. The masked revolutionary spoke. In the meantime, maybe you could help show him the ropes. It would make the process go much more smoothly if he was with a friend, someone he was comfortable with. Yeah, I can do that. Colin smiled as she offered Rai a hand. Welcome to the Black Knights, Rai. He smiled as he firmly grasped her hand. End flashback. So, he's a friend of yours from school? Ogie asked Colin, bringing her thoughts back to reality. Yeah, the one with amnesia I told you about. Amnesia, huh? Poor kid. Gotta be rough when you don't remember who you are. Inoue said. You sure it's a good idea to bring him in? Sugiyama asked. We talked about it with Zero. Colin replied. Even some of the bots seem okay with it. He's a good guy. Bumblebee voiced his opinion. With the proper training, I think he'll make a good Black Knight. Hey guys, look. Tamaki got everyone's attention. The news is all over us. The Black Knights and the Yellow Autobot turned their attention to a news report about the recent successes of the Black Knights and the Autobots. Rai wandered around the halls of the Ark, looking around. He remembered how the Autobots told him this once served as the main Exodus ship for leaving Cybertron. So, he naturally expected it to be big, but this seemed very big. He could only wonder what the ship looked like on the outside. However, the white-haired boy's thoughts were caught by the sound of metal hitting metal. He looked to the right to see a large bolt had fallen onto the ground. He curiously walked over to pick up the bolt when he heard some odd noise that sounded like a scurrying kind of sound, only more metallic. It came from the high ceiling above him, but as he looked around, he didn't see anything. Hello? Is someone there? He tried to speak out, but he didn't get a proper response, just more of that odd sound. Rai was about to walk around and keep looking when he tripped and fell over something. He groaned a bit as he got up, only to see a small metal creature staring right at him. He got startled a bit as he jumped back on his backside to get a better look at the creature. It didn't look any bigger than the cat at Ashford, Arthur. It had a large metal head with tiny little metal legs underneath it and big buggy blue eyes. The creature looked at Rai curiously. Where did you come from? Rai stood up a bit. Lelouch didn't say anything about the bots having pets. It actually looked kinda cute. He smiled as he took out the bolt he picked up. You play fetch. The creature bounced up and down and ran in a circle almost like an excited puppy dog. Well, go fetch. Rai threw the bolt down the hall as the small creature ran to go get it. But it actually seemed to eat the bolt, much to Ray's shock. Wait, don't eat that. You're gonna choke. The creature turned towards Rai and seemed alright. Or, not. The creature then scurried back to Rai and actually cuddled against his leg. Rai smiled, taking a liking to the creature. I bet the others would love to meet you. Come on. Rai walked back the way he came with the tiny creature following him. However, Rai didn't seem to notice the hole in the wall behind him with large bite marks all around it, even sparks shooting out from broken circuits. Back at the bridge, the Black Knights and Bumblebee were watching the news that showed a press conference with the Britannian Knight Guilford at the stand receiving questions. Sir Guilford, why is it we still have yet to receive a comment from Princess Cornelia? The Viceroy is currently unavailable at the moment, so I'll be taking the questions. Guilford answered, on the account Cornelia hadn't yet returned from her mission. What do you say about the Black Knights? The Black Knights are a terrorist organization being led by the man who murdered Prince Clovis. As of yet, we have been unable to learn of Zero's identity or of their location. Guilford responded. What about these Autobots? It is rather obvious they aren't nightmares. Can you make any comments about them? I cannot offer any comments with that. Guilford answered. Sir Guilford, you say the Black Knights are terrorists, yet they and the Autobots have been hitting multiple terrorist cells as well as criminal syndicates and even exposed corrupt politics. They even gone so far as to turn in solid evidence to the police. Despite their actions, they do not answer to any law enforcement or governing body. If they aren't terrorists, then they are vigilantes that take the law into their own hands. Tamaki smirked. Look at them, nice to see them being grilled for a change. Kinda nice to know we're getting this much support, even Britannian civilians are wanting to back us. Ogie said. You say that now but wait till we actually fight Britannia again. Minami said. That's right, Once that happens, they can just turn around and go back to Britannia. Sugiyama agreed. Colin immediately thought of her friends among the student council. They all seemed like very good people. Would they support Britannia despite most of them being saved by the Black Knights? Maybe if Britannia's corruption was exposed, more people could side with them. Not if we show that it's the whole empire that's corrupt, and even a puppet to the Decepticons. Bumblebee voiced with bleeps. We could get plenty of factions in Britannia wanting to join us. Inoue looked a bit skeptical. Yeah, that'd be the day. However, their discussion was cut off as the television flickered on and off, along with all the lights in the Ark's bridge, turning on and off quickly and the TV going to static, much to their confusion. What the heck? Tamaki questioned. What's going on? Yoshida also questioned. Some kind of power failure. Ogi asked as they all turned their eyes toward Bumblebee, who shrugged. Don't look at me, I'm not a mechanic. We should probably find the other bots and see what's going on. Colin suggested. Yeah, good idea. Ogi agreed as they all quickly got down onto the ground and followed Bumblebee toward the ground bridge bay where Ratchet probably still was. The panels on the floor have all been lifted as Ratchet pulled out a motherboard only to find it with several blown out holes in it. We most definitely have a problem. Ratchet groaned. But what could have caused this? Right as Bumblebee and the rest of the Black Knights entered the bay, the lights flickered on and off again, causing they, as well as Zero, Bulkhead, Ironhide, and Fix-It to look in concern. Or that? Bulkhead questioned. It's happening here too. Ogi asked. The bridge was going on and off just like over here. Colin said. Even the TV was wiped out. Tamaki grumbled. Just when it was getting good too. Inoue gave Tamaki a slight elbow. So, what's going on? Some kind of generator failure? Colin asked. Not sure, but the ground bridge appears to be the worst of it right now. Zero informed. We couldn't even get a remote start. Didn't you guys say this ship crashed-landed? Yoshida questioned. Maybe something broke when we landed. The Ark crashed years ago, and we haven't had this kind of problem since then. Ironhide said. Everything was fully functional for a long time and I even checked all the systems that received the most damage. Fix-It added. This hasn't happened before. Tamaki looked at the motherboard that Ratchet was still holding. Hey, call me crazy, but those kinda look like bite marks. Bite marks? Colin and Ogi questioned at the same time as they all looked toward the motherboard. That does look like it was chewed through. Minami noticed. But what could have bitten into a large and functioning circuit board and not leave behind some kind of body? Zero guessed. Don't be absurd. Ratchet dismissed the idea. It could be the main grid, hopefully it isn't a substation malfunction. Hey guys, look what I found. Rai entered the room. We're busy. Ratchet exclaimed only to scream and looked in horror at the small metal creature he was holding in his arms. Ironhide, Bulkhead, and Bumblebee were immediately on high alert as they frantically pointed their energon blasters in Ray's direction as Ratchet backed up. Code Red, Code Red, Code Red, Code Red. Fix-It shouted as a siren and alarm popped out of his head and he hid behind the shivering Bulkhead. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Colin shouted as she and the other Black Knights, even Zero, quickly stood protectively in front of the shocked Rai. What the hell's gotten into you guys? All of them were shocked to see the bots like this, even Lelouch's eyes widened at seeing the Autobots this frantic. Scraplet! Scraplet! Bulkhead and Fix-It both screamed. What the heck is a scraplet? Rai questioned. The most dangerous parasite in Cybertronian history. Ironhide exclaimed. The Black Knights all looked to the small metal creature Rai was still holding and only looked skeptical. This? Tamaki questioned with a scoff. You're kidding, right? You guys are huge. Ogi said. This, scraplet, thing here is well, tiny. The Autobots looked all the more scared. You have no idea the damage that tiny thing can do. Bulkhead backed away slowly, keeping his massive gun trained in that direction. What damage? It doesn't look any bigger than a chihuahua. Yoshida said as all the Black Knights looked at the scraplet as it opened its eyes. Rai, where did you find this? Zero asked, though his tone indicated he was on the air of caution. Just in the halls. Rai answered. Tamaki chuckled. Get a load of their little monster. He laughed a bit. Monster. It looks completely harmless. Colin said with a small smile. You know, it's actually kinda cute. Inoue smiled a bit herself. Yeah, little guy wouldn't hurt anything. Rai patted its round head. That is not a house pet, it's a fracking parasite. Ironhide exclaimed. Scraplets are even more dangerous than the Decepticons. You must get rid of it. Fix-It also exclaimed, still hiding behind Bulkhead's leg. Most of the Black Knights didn't seem to pay attention, but Lelouch had a look of uncertainty underneath his mask. If the Autobots are really this afraid of it, but it's so small, why would they be so scared? The Scraplet looked past the humans surrounding it and happened to spot the Autobots. The creature's point of view is almost a mix of metal detection and infrared. It saw the living sentient machines and immediately leapt from Ray's grip, surprising him and the Black Knights, its mouth opened to reveal multiple serrated teeth and what looked like the inside of a garbage disposal with buzzsaw blades. It quickly made its way toward the Autobots as Bumblebee, Ironhide, and Bulkhead tried to shoot at it with their energon blasters, but it was so small they couldn't hit it. It leapt toward Bumblebee, who was closer, and began actually chewing on his leg. All the Black Knights were taken aback by this, even Lelouch's eyes widened in shock underneath his mask. Bumblebee fell back as he tried to grab the Scraplet, but it chewed on his hand and began to move its way up his arm, only for him to brush it off. The Scraplet was about to jump back towards him, until Rai came in with a crowbar and began to pound it relentlessly. After 2 hits, it was already dead, but he kept pounding and yelling. At the 8th strike, Zero firmly placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. All right, I think you got it, take it easy. The masked leader said calmly, letting Rai calm down before he immediately ran toward Bumblebee. None of the Black Knights had the words for this, the only expressions they currently had were round eyes and circular jaws. Holy crap, that came out of nowhere. Tamaki voiced with wide eyes. Definitely did not see that coming. The shocked Colin uttered. It was so small, and it did that. Ogi stuttered as he gestured toward the injured Bumblebee as Rai and Ratchet were trying to help him. I'm sorry. I had no idea. Rai quickly apologized. Don't worry about. Bumblebee told him. He's gonna be okay, right? Rai asked Ratchet, who checked the wound on him. Only a mesh wound, he'll live. Ratchet said. Now do you believe us? Ironhide exclaimed toward the Black Knights. All Scraplets do is dismantle machinery and eat anything metal. Bulkhead exclaimed. Especially moving and living metal. Fix-It added, still behind Bulkhead's leg. Well, Bugs squashed, game over. Right, Ogi hopped. No, Ratchet insisted. When it comes to Scraplets there's never just one. You're kidding, there's more of these things. Inoue exclaimed. How did they even get in here? Colin questioned. I think I know. Ironhide had a pretty good idea. The Autobots and Black Knights all gathered in the cargo bay as they looked into the giant canister that was brought in from the Arctic the previous night, only to find it completely empty with a gaping hole along the side. All the Black Knights, including Rai and Zero, had rifles in their hands as they and especially the Autobots looked very nervous. It's a trap. A Scraplet trap, Ratchet stated. An empty Scraplet trap. Bulkhead shivered with Fix-It still hiding behind him. The pod was, most likely ejected into space, eons ago, maybe even before the war began, judging by the POD's carbon grating, matting, dating. Fix-It stuttered. You stuttering from your glitch? Or out of fear? Yoshida asked. Both. Fix-It replied. Obviously, it happened landed in the Arctic, perhaps decades maybe even centuries ago, where the sub-zero temperatures kept the Scraplets in stasis. Zero assumed. Until we brought it home to thaw out. Ironhide groaned. Now they're wide awake and hungry for breakfast. Colin uttered. So, how many are we talking about? Rai asked. Given the size of the first one, and the diameter of this pod, I'd assume probably thousands. Zero guessed. Thousands. Tamaki, Ogi, and all the other Black Knights, even Bulkhead, shouted at the same time. There'll be more, Ironhide said. Scraplets are fast multipliers. Ratchet nodded in agreement. The power malfunctions and ground bridge damage are sure signs that their infestation is well underway. The Arctic. Optimus was scaling down an icy cliff while RC and Cliffjumper each searched different parts of the area as well. They'd spent the last few hours searching, but Optimus' attention was caught by his sensor going off, flashing a blue light on his logo. RC, Cliffjumper, what is your status? Optimus contacted them via the comms. My sensors are going off. RC contacted back. Mine too. Guess we should call for the chauffeur before we become ice sculptures. Cliffjumper said. Optimus tried to contact the Ark. Optimus to base, core temperature readings have reached the blue zone. Prepare to activate ground bridge. However, the only response Optimus received was static and unresponsive radio signals, causing him to look in surprise and concern. The Ark, bridge. Ironhide to Optimus, do you read me? Ironhide tried to contact his leader from the main station on the bridge, but only received the same staticky signal. I can't get through. Hang on, let me try. Colin pulled out her personal cell phone and dialed a number. Cliffjumper, it's Colin, are you there? She didn't get a response, just the same static. Cliff, it's Colin, can you hear me? Still nothing. That won't work. Zero said. We adjusted the Ark's communication frequencies so that your own personal cellular devices would be compatible with it, while also hiding the signal from other parties. Fix-It added. It's how we're able to hide from the Decepticons in Britannia, otherwise it would be impossible to get a signal down here. Zero explained. Huh, I was wondering how I could get 5 bars here. Sugiyama assumed as he looked at his own cell phone. I just thought you guys had some kind of fancy alien Wi-Fi or something. Tamaki assumed. We'll worry about that later. Ogi stated. Why can't we reach Optimus? The scraplets have gotten into the comlink system, how else? Ratchet stated. If we don't eradicate these creatures immediately, they'll reduce the entire Ark to a scarf heap. Well, I saw we bug out of here and let em keep it. Bulkhead exclaimed. I'm all for that. Let's just leave before we become the special of the day. Bumblebee agreed. No, not an option. Ironhide stated firmly. Besides the intense water pressure outside, if the ground bridge isn't working soon, Optimus, RC, and Cliffjumper will all die. That took all the Black Knights by surprise. They will. Rice stuttered with fear. Seriously, how the hell can a little cold bother you guys? You're freaking made of metal. Tamaki exclaimed. Haven't you even traveled through space? That's supposed to be so cold you freeze the second you go out there. Inoue also exclaimed. It's not just the cold. Fix-It said. The unique atmospheric elements of your planet combined with sub-zero temperatures can create an effect that is similar to oxidation, which has a drastic effect on Cybertronian biology. Zero looked at the shocked Black Knights. I told you before when we first met. These are not nightmares or even simple machines. The Autobots are sentient machines, they think and feel the same way we do, they even have weaknesses the way we do as well. Robots, that can feel. Colin uttered in surprise. Robots, that can die. Oji's eyes widened, a feeling of dread seeping through him that all the other Black Knights felt as well. Tamaki looked towards the large green Autobot. Bulkhead, I've seen you charge nightmares head on and you always keep saying how you lop fenders with those con guys, but you're afraid of a bunch of bugs. Tamaki, you haven't seen a swarm of these things devour a bot. I have. Bulkhead recalled dreadfully. They pick you apart from the inside out. Going for the small, juicy bits first. Fuse by fuse, circuit by circuit, till there's nothing left. And I mean nothing, not even your optics. And just imagine what they can do to mini-cons. Fix-It shivered. They are devoured in seconds. All the Black Knights looked to each other with worry. They're like termites, Rice said. Termites. More like piranhas, Colin exclaimed. Oji's fists clenched with determination as he stepped forward. You have to let us help you. We're not made of metal. Inoue said. Yeah, those little pests can't eat us. Tamaki smirked. Before any of the Autobots could voice protests, Zero had spoken up. With the comlink systems down, we can't call for any reinforcements, and we can't leave either or we'll be crushed by the water pressure outside. We're just as trapped as all of you, you may as well use all the tools you have at your disposal. Ratchet sighed. Typically, I find your fleshiness to be your least engaging quality. But it would appear to provide an advantage underneath these extremes. Alright, so we'll divide and conquer. Zero got to work. First, tell me the most likely locations where the scraplets would all be concentrated. Ogi, you and I will watch Ratchet and Fix-It as they repair the ground bridge. Yoshida, Minami, and Sugiyama, you go with Ironhide and watch over our nightmares, we can't risk them becoming the next Antra. The rest of you will pair off, Colin and Tamaki with Bulkhead, Ryan Inoue with Bumblebee. Colin smirked eagerly as she cocked her rifle. Time to play exterminator. Bumblebee and Bulkhead both looked towards each other and shivered in horror, even Fixit looked more than a little nervous. The Arctic. Optimus, Cliffjumper, and RC continued to trudge through the blizzardy winds, the cold slowly eating away at them as their leader continued to try and contact their comrades. Optimus to Arc, can you read? Still no response. I can't even get through to Colin. RC said as she struggled through the cold. Her attention was caught by her partner who fell on his knees a bit. Cliff. Despite the conditions, Cliffjumper bore his signature grin. You sure a nice long drive wouldn't help. I hear northern Britannia is nice this time of year. The nearest temperate climate is too distant. Cliffjumper. Optimus told him as he and RC helped him to stand up. Attempting to reach it would expend too much energy and hasten the freezing process. Until Ratchet sends for us, and he will, our best option will be to seek shelter and insulate ourselves. The Ark. Colin and Tamaki each held a rifle as they led the shivering Bulkhead down a darkened hallway, while he held a large flashlight in one hand and the other converted into his energon blaster, while looking around frantically. Hey, we're guarding the Autobots for a change. Never thought I'd see the day. Colin said. I don't see why we don't just use our nightmares to squash these things. Tamaki said. What part of, they eat metal, did you not understand? Colin glared at him. Besides, we still can't make nightmares off an assembly line like Britannia, we'd just basically be throwing them away. Bulkhead shivered. Rye said he found the first one here, right? The lights suddenly went out, causing Bulkhead to emit a high-pitched scream, which startled Colin and Tamaki. The lights came on as they both shot Bulkhead a skeptical look. Did you just scream like a little girl? Tamaki questioned. No. Bulkhead immediately said. Maybe. Can we talk about this later? They both shrugged as they continued their search. As they turned down one corner and proceeded further down the large hallway, neither the two Black Knights nor the one Autobot noticed the scurrying sounds in the ventilation and walls around and above them. The frantic Bulkhead continued to aim his blaster in any direction he thought he heard a scraplet. Take it easy, big guy. Colin tried to console him. Just stay focused, and above all, try not to panic. She didn't get a chance to finish as Bulkhead panicked and blasted a hole in the right wall, followed by the left, before shooting straight up, causing multiple cables and pieces of rubble to fall in him, resulting in him giving a high-pitched scream again. Tamaki and Colin turned around immediately, ready to open fire, only to both look in complete fluster and confusion, even a bit embarrassment, at the sight of Bulkhead panicking and screaming as he tried to shove off all the large cables draped over him. Okay. That's one image I'm not gonna get out of my head. Tamaki rubbed his hand down his face. Colin shook her head. Bulkhead, you're fine. It's just a bunch of cables. She told him, pulling Bulkhead out of his panic mode. Oh right. He laughed nervously. Cables. Heh. He held one cable, only for it to fall out of the ceiling and for several real scraplets to begin falling down onto the group, resulting in Bulkhead screaming again as Colin and Tamaki immediately opened fire at the falling robotic vermin. In a separate hallway, Rai and Inoue, each armed with a flamethrower and a rifle respectively, took point as they turned a corner, followed by Bumblebee as he had both energon blasters out. They looked in shock at the hallway that had bite marks and trails all over it, and machinery completely stripped off. Jesus Christ, don't these things ever stop eating? Inoue questioned. They're like living garbage disposals. Rai stated. I'm just glad they don't eat flesh. Speak for yourself, Bumblebee bleeped, still trying to maintain his composure as they continued down the hall. The trio slowly came towards a ventilation port at the far end of the hallway where they thought they heard some scurrying sounds on the other end of the panel. Bumblebee motioned for the two to find cover around the corner, which they did as Bumblebee slowly began to grip the panel. He quickly pried it off as Rai and Inoue aimed their weapons down the port, with Bumblebee aiming both his right energon blaster, only to find it was simply a rundown fan. However, they heard the real deal coming from a small hole behind them as they turned to hear the noise of metal grinding and running saws coming closer and closer. Time for the appetizers, Rai uttered in nervousness. A group of scraplets began to pour out of the hole as Inoue immediately shot her rifle. The bullets seemed to tear through each scraplet like tissue paper while Rai used his flamethrower to roast the ones closer. However, it seemed like more were pouring in through that hole as Bumblebee desperately opened fire. Sugiyama looked into a screen that showed night vision footage of all the nightmares they stored inside the large vault door. Doesn't look like the scraplets got inside. The door is locked, we should be good. Minami pressed a few buttons on a small man-made console on the other side of the massive vault door to keep it sealed. It'll take a lot more than that to stop these things. Ironhide commented as he and Yoshida kept their eyes open on the open hallway that was the only way away from the nightmare docking bay. You've taken on those Decepticons for years, now just started wiping the floor with Britannia. Why is it so odd that it feels like we're taking a last stand against some alien bugs? Yoshida questioned. Believe me, these bugs can do a whole lot more damage. But as annoying as they are, they're still nothing compared to the Rust Plague. Ironhide said. I'm afraid to ask. Minami said. SSHH, listen. You guys hear that? Sugiyama shushed them as the group listened closely and they began to hear all sorts of scurrying sounds coming from the hallway they were in front of. Ironhide readied his energon cannons. Lock and load, soldiers. We got company. All three Black Knights aimed their rifles in the same direction. The second the small horde of scraplets came into view along the walls and floors, they all opened fire with explosive results. Groundbridge Bay. Ratchet worked with the open floor panels as Fix-It worked with a built-in mini-con-sized station along the side of one of the groundbridge portals as Zero and Ogi both kept watch, with Zero wielding his own flamethrower while Ogi held a rifle in his hands. How's it going over there? Ogi asked the two bots. Ratchet groaned in frustration. I've repaired the damaged conductors, and rerouted the central conduits, but the groundbridge still won't receive power. We can't even remote start it. Zero questioned. Negative. Fix-It shook his head. Even if we did get the remote link reconnected, the ground bridge itself still needs power to activate. Damn it, Lelouch thought. Come on, think. If all the systems are fixed, why isn't still not receiving power? Could it be something wrong with the power source itself? When this is over, I need to get a better handle on Cybertronian technology. He spared a glance toward Ogi, whose face had turned completely pale. Ogi. Up there, Ogi shakily pointed his hand toward the northern wall toward a ventilation shaft near the ceiling. Zero looked in that direction and gave an audible gasp. There were at least 100 scraplets already crawling along the walls. Ratchet. Fix it. Find cover. Now. Zero shouted, getting both their attention as they, themselves turned and looked in shock at all the scraplets. The scraplets themselves spotted the two Cybertronians with their own vision before they opened their jaws and actually leapt off the wall and flew towards their next entra. They actually flew, all via small rocket propulsions at the bottom of their tiny bodies. They can fly, Ogi yelled. You never said they could fly. It didn't matter at that point as a large majority of the scraplets were already on their way towards Ratchet, him being the biggest piece of meat in the area. Despite Ogi already shooting a few of them down, they had already swarmed Ratchet and forced him to the ground as they began to devour his outer metal skin first. Ratchet, Ogi and Zero were already running toward him, when Zero spotted Fix-It screaming and trying to wheel away from a smaller group of flying scraplets chasing him. Ogi, help Ratchet. I got Fix-It. Zero ordered as he immediately ran towards the mini-con while Ogi ran and shot with his gun to try and get the scraplets off the medic bot. Fix-It appeared to be cornered and held his servos in front of his face to shield himself, but Zero was already there as he shot his flamethrower to destroy the scraplets that were close to Fix-It before Zero himself used his body as a shield while he used his flamethrower to keep the scraplets back. Find cover, Fix-It, now! Zero exclaimed. Will do. Fix-It said quickly and fearfully as he moved along the wall with Zero keeping him covered. If Fix-It was swarmed by the scraplets, he'd be devoured in seconds. No way was Lelouch going to let that happen. Ogi was around Ratchet, he didn't want to risk damaging him further by shooting, so he tried to use his rifle as a blunt weapon to smash the scraplets one by one. Though he did smash everyone with 1 or 2 hits, there were still many already eating through Ratchet's metal skin. Ogi, the fire extinguisher. Ogi pointed to said red tool along the wall, which the Black Knight immediately ran toward, picked up, and used as he sprayed all over Ratchet's body. Direct exposure to the condensed and cooled chemicals inside the extinguisher, the scraplets immediately froze and stiffened up. Within a single minute, all the scraplets were off the injured Ratchet, and Zero had already barbecued the rest while helping Fix-It find cover underneath a stairwell. Ratchet rested for a bit as Ogie took a few deep breaths while Fix-It appeared somewhat relieved. Zero looked towards the bodies of the scraplets they just killed. A single scraplet isn't that hard to kill, Lelouch thought. It takes 1 or 2 hits with a blunt weapon, and a single burst of extreme heat or cold. The problem is they always seem to overwhelm their prey with numbers, much like certain insects like scarab beetles, or even piranhas. There has to be a way to neutralize all of them at once. However, their attention was caught by the noises of more incoming scraplets as all 4 of them looked up to see something that made each of their own eyes or optics go circular. Right as Bulkhead, Colin, Tamaki, Bumblebee, Rai, Inoue, Ironhide, Minami, Yoshida, and Sugiyama all came walking into the bay, with the bots looking a bit worse for wear, and even bleeding Energon a bit as well. Ratchet, get the patch kit, Ironhide stated. We're all leaking Energon like, whoa. He exclaimed as everyone looked up in shock and horror at the swarm of hundreds of scraplets all flying and gathering around near the ceiling. Holy shit. Tamaki yelled as all the Black Knights, even Colin and Rai instinctively backed away. Everyone readied themselves and their respective weapons as all of the flying scraplets set their sights on the newly arrived Autobots and flew toward them with open jaws. Bumblebee and Ironhide were the first to open fire, with Ironhide's cannons taking out the most, but it didn't seem to even slow down the incoming swarm. Eat this, Bulkhead shouted as he used his right-hand mace to smash a large group of scraplets, only to see some devouring his left hand, resulting in him screaming like a little girl again as more scraplets began to swarm him. All the Black Knights immediately opened fire as they ran into the fray, shooting up and hitting every single scraplet they could, reducing them to scrap metal while Rai and Zero both used their flamethrowers to destroy all the scraplets that had already begun to swarm Bumblebee and Bulkhead, who already fell to the ground and began to scrape off the parasites biting into their bodies. Tamaki even went to butt several of them off Bulkhead with his rifle as Ogie continued to spray the fire extinguisher over Ratchet, who was still being swarmed himself. Ironhide seemed to be still going at it with his cannons as he yelled like a warrior and continued to fire up at the swarm's main cluster before they all began to overpower him, and he fell down as well. The Arctic, Optimus, RC, and Cliffjumper had found something of a small cave to keep themselves covered from the freezing temperatures and snowy winds that continued to blow over them, but it didn't provide too much cover, only enough to barely hold themselves. Optimus kept his eyes open while Cliffjumper struggled with his own, only closing them for a brief second before suddenly opening them up. I'm awake, he lowered his head. This is so not cool. Yeah, that was not a good joke. Optimus paid it no mind as he directed his attention to the other Autobot in their group. RC, wake up. The blue female Autobot woke up a bit as she rubbed her optics. Just resting my eyes. The longer we remain alert, the longer we remain alive, Optimus said. So, what do you think happened back at the Ark? We can't get a ground bridge or call for any pickup. Cliffjumper said kinda weakly. I couldn't even reach Colin's cell number. Our predicament could be the cause of a simple malfunction, Optimus assumed. With 3 brainiacs like Ratchet, Fix-It, and Lelouch all gathered there. Cliffjumper asked. Nah, I don't think it was a simple malfunction. Something big must have happened. Speaking of big, you know something I didn't expect? RC asked, trying to maintain a conversation to keep themselves alive as long as possible. What Lelouch did for Colin. He used his Geass to provide her and her mother a new place to stay. Optimus said. Yeah, she really hated that mansion she lived in. Cliffjumper said. That glitch of a stepmom pretty much made her and her mom miserable there. He chuckled a bit. You know, when I helped Colin pack up her and her mom's things, and we were about to head out, her stepmom tried to stop her, and you know what Colin did? She called her stepmom a royal bitch, before delivering a right hook to the face. He laughed. Kid's got a real fire in her. RC smirked. I like her, she's a real fighter. Her smile faded slightly. But it's not just what Lelouch did for, but he brought that kid in from his school. Rai, Cliffjumper said. Yeah, apparently he found out about Lelouch being Zero by complete accident. We're not exactly running a school program right here, RC said. Not sure what good the kid can do right now. Rai may be inexperienced at the moment, Colin's temper and stubbornness can be troublesome, and Lelouch himself has issues of his own. Optimus began. However, each of their own inner strength is without bounds. Their desires on creating a better world are very real, as is their passion for justice. One should not be measured by size or origin alone. The Ark. The burnt, frozen, and broken bodies of countless scraplets laid scattered across the floor of the ground bridge bay while Zero, Ogi, and Rai used their respective flamethrowers and fire extinguishers to finish off the remains of the scraplets on the floors, while some of the remaining Black Knights, including Tamaki, used their guns as blunt weapons to make sure they stayed down. The Autobots each looked worse for wear, as Bumblebee, Bulkhead, Ratchet, and even Ironhide were all covered in bite marks and trails, bleeding energon all over as they sat against the wall in fatigue. Fix-It was pretty much the only Cybertronian who was extremely lucky to not have a scratch on him yet. "Please tell me we got them all," Colin said. In direct response to that, they all heard a very faint but very familiar sound coming from down the halls. The sounds of scraplets feasting and moving throughout the rest of the Ark. "Hardly," Ratchet said. "These were just scouts." "Oh, come on," Tamaki exclaimed in frustration. "Are you kidding me? Primus, help us!" Bumblebee sunk further into the floor. "So, the rest of them know we're in here?" Fix-It stuttered as he stuck particularly close to Zero. "Most likely," Zero responded. "They sent scouts to isolate and corner their prey. That's actually rather clever." "Great, so how about you guys use those big brains to find a way to get those things out of here?" Tamaki exclaimed. "What do you think we've been doing?" Ironhide stated. "Well, playing exterminator obviously didn't work, we barely made a dent in them." Bulkhead groaned. "If we allow ourselves to become their next meal, Optimus, RC, and Cliffjumper will never make it home." Ratchet said. "We must get the ground bridge operational. We do that, we can use it send the scraplets anywhere on Earth." Ogi said with realization. "Hey, I got an idea." Tamaki stated. "Let's drop these things off right at Britannia's doorstep. Let those guys deal with all this." "That is a bad idea." Zero contradicted immediately. "Yes, the scraplets may be able to do some damage to Britannia, but with the Decepticons allied with them and the advanced technology they have at their disposal, they could find a way to trap the scraplets and potentially weaponize them." That thought made Bumblebee, Bulkhead, Fix-It, and even a few Black Knights shake with fear. Weaponized scraplets, Bulkhead shivered. If they possessed something like that, they could destroy all enemies who stand in their way, including us. Ratchet stated. "Sending to Britannia is out of the question." "Damn it," Tamaki grumbled while Inoue smacked him upside the head for coming up with that idea. "Well, why don't we just send them back to the Arctic?" Rai suggested. "I mean, we already know they don't like the cold. Just using a fire extinguisher gives them frostbite." "That is actually a really good idea," Colin voiced. "Given the body mass each individual scraplet, direct exposure to sub-zero temperatures should freeze them within seconds." Zero said. "Well then, it looks like we have a plan," Ironhide stated. "But all the good that's going to do if we can't get the ground bridge up." "But I don't understand why it isn't working," Fix-It said. "I checked over all its manual systems, everything in here should be working properly." Ratchet began to think. The ground bridge itself should be working properly, so if it still isn't receiving power, his eyes widened. There must be a breach in the energon fuel line. Great, but not very helpful. Bumblebee stumbled as he couldn't even stand up properly. Bulkhead groaned. "If we weren't all breaching, one of us could get back over there and fix it." "Tell us where to find it." Ogi stepped forward. "And how we can fix it," Colin added. Ogi, Colin, and Rai watched their steps as they tiptoed through a hallway, following a tube that served as the energon fuel line connecting to the ground bridge bay with dozens of scraplets walking along the floor. However, the scraplets themselves paid the humans no mind as they were organic and didn't serve as any kind of meal for them. Ogi held a toolbox as he looked back to see how both Rai and even Colin were a little nervous around the scraplets and chose to console them. "It's okay," he told them. "Remember, we're good. We're not made of metal." Colin's eyes spotted what they were looking for. "There's the breach." She pointed towards an area of the tube where liquid energon was leaking out of its underside. The trio quickly ran towards the spot as Ogi set the toolbox down. Come on, we need to work fast. Groundbridge Bay. Zero and the remaining Black Knights, Tamaki, Inoue, Yoshida, Minami, and Sugiyama all stood guard around the injured Autobots and Fix-It, waiting for the go to activate the ground bridge and the inevitable swarm to come. So, if we get the ground bridge up, Inoue said. When we get the ground bridge up. Ironhide instead. Right, when we get it up, do we send our infestation problem out, or bring our bots in? Inoue asked. Optimus, RC, and Cliffjumper would all be fresh meat. Ratchet said. We bring them in first and the scraplets would have no reason to leave. You've dealt with scraplets before, how did you handle them? Zero asked the Autobots. Ironhide sighed. Those things may be killing machines, but they're not all that bright. We could always lure them into special traps. It's like how we get rid of rats and things. Minami said. And we always use some kind of bait. Where are we going to get bait? Bulkhead exclaimed. The scraplets already helped themselves to everything in here. Unless you guys got a large chunk of metal hanging around, I don't see anything we can use as bait. Tamaki stated. An idea soon popped into Lelouch's head. Bait. With nothing said, he immediately turned around and ran towards the exit, much to everyone's surprise. Huh, hey, where the hell are you going? Tamaki questioned. I have an idea. Protect the Autobots. I'll be back. Zero called to them as he already left the bay. Did he just ditch us? Tamaki exclaimed. No, he has a plan. Zero always has a plan. Fix-It glitched. How could he even ditch us anyway? Inoue questioned. We're thousands of feet underwater. He's got nowhere to go. Bumblebee looked in the direction Lelouch ran. There is no way Lelouch would just ditch us all like this. He says he has a plan and I believe him. I just hope he knows what he's doing because we're almost out of time. Ryan Collin held a large piece of metal over the breached area of the Energon fuel line as Ogie finished using the blowtorch to weld it shut. Alright, that should hold. Ogie said with a sigh of relief. However, right as he said that, all the scraplets became much more active as they flew into the air and into a ventilation shaft into the ceiling. Uh-oh. Guess it's lunch time. Rai gulped as he, Ogie, and Colin looked in worry. Pretty much every scraplet had burst out of all the ventilation shafts in the ground bridge bay and began to circle around in the ceiling as Bulkhead and Bumblebee sunk themselves lower into the ground, with Fix-It taking cover underneath the stairwell while all the Black Knights armed themselves with what little ammunition they had left. Even Ironhide and Ratchet looked more than a little worried. Using a special mini-con path that Fix-It showed him, Zero was able to quickly get where he needed to go. This path served as a means for mini-cons to get to certain areas in the Ark as quickly as possible without running the risk of getting crushed underneath larger bot feet in the event of an emergency. Zero quickly came towards a large vault door before running toward a control pad at the side. No, this won't end here, he said to himself. There is no way I'm losing to some oversized metal termites. After putting in the necessary code, Zero stepped back as he took off his mask to reveal his own face as the vault door began to open. Lelouch smirked once he saw all the untouched nightmares inside. You want bait, I'll give you bait. The Arctic. This seemed like the end. Their core temperatures had reached an all-time low as Cliffjumper, RC, and even the mighty Optimus looked like they were ready to accept their fate as they laid down in the piling snow. You know the worst part? RC asked weakly. After battling cons all these years and just now starting to fight Britannia, getting smacked down, shot at, blown up, this is how our lights go out. Well, least we ain't going alone. Cliffjumper said. If I'm gonna go, I'm at least glad, it's with bots I know. RC, Cliffjumper, this may not be the finished we had planned. Optimus seemed acceptant of his fate. But if this is indeed the end, if we are to become one with the Allspark, he opened his palm as RC and Cliffjumper both reached out and grabbed onto it. I couldn't have asked for a better partner, thanks for everything RC. Cliffjumper smiled weakly at her as she smiled back. It's been an honor serving with you, Optimus Prime. The red Autobot told his leader. Though Optimus was ready to accept this as his fate, there was a small hint of regret in his eyes. Ever since he had met Lelouch, he had hoped he'd be able to mentor and guide the vengeful youth into becoming the hero that this world needs. But he did see that there was goodness in him, all he could do now was hope that he would find happiness one day. Ogi, Colin, and Rai ran as fast as they could into the ground bridge bay as the scraplets all began to gather together. "Guys! All systems go!" Ogi exclaimed. "Fire it up!" Colin shouted. Fix-It quickly took out his remote and saw that everything was indeed ready. Activating ground bridge now. He pressed the remote activation as the centermost port opened with a titular green swirling portal. Optimus looked up once he saw a ground bridge portal open up a few yards away. There may still be hope for them yet. Whoa, that's a lot of bugs. Rai shivered as he saw all the scraplets gathering together near the ceiling. Colin looked around and saw someone was missing. "Where's Zero?" "Gone," Tamaki shouted. "He just ran off." "What?" Ogi exclaimed as he, Colin, and especially Rai looked in shock. "He just left us?" Colin questioned in disbelief. "No, he wouldn't," Rai stuttered. "He wouldn't leave us like this." His eyes were one of worry. "Lelouch, you wouldn't, would you?" Before anyone else could say anything, they heard a rolling noise coming from down the hall as a pair of lights shined into the bay. Something was coming. "Get out of the way. Now." Despite the huge surprise, every Black Knight present ran or dashed out of the way just in time as a Black Sutherland rolled onto the scene and came to a stop with the groundbridge portal right behind him. "Hey, over here," Lelouch called to the scraplets, his face being one of determination, as he waved his nightmare's arms and even flashed a pair of lights to get their attention. They saw the waving machine. "Who's hungry for the main course?" All of them opened their jaws as they flew towards their next meal. "Come and get it." Lelouch put his nightmare in reverse and slammed it back to send it rolling backwards into the groundbridge portal with the entire scraplet swarm following him. The Black Knights and all the Autobots couldn't believe their eyes. "Hold on, did he just?" Bulkhead stuttered. "What in the hell does he think he's doing?" Tamaki questioned. "He's saving our lives. That's what," Colin stated with a wide grin. Ogi smiled along with Rai, the amnesiac youth turning towards Bumblebee, both having knowing looks in their eyes as the yellow Autobot nodded. Even Ironhide gave an impressive smirk. "Not bad, kid, not bad." Optimus, RC, and Cliffjumper groaned as they weakly trudged towards the open groundbridge portal in front of them. However, they did not expect a Black Sutherland to come rolling out backwards. The nightmare began to lose its traction once it hit the ice. "Get down, now." Lelouch called to the three Autobots as he lost control and the nightmare slammed down onto the ground just as the scraplet swarm came pouring out of the portal. The scraplets all looked confused for a moment before they set their sights on the trio of Autobots in front of them before they opened their jaws and shot towards them. Optimus immediately held his hands back to protect Cliffjumper and RC. Lelouch saw this from the monitor in his cockpit and grunted in frustration, gripping the controls, as his face contorted a slight sign of fear. Come on, freeze." However, right as the scraplets began to close in, their bodies completely froze from the sudden exposure to the Arctic's temperature. Their frozen bodies all flew and bounced over Optimus' body, and even a bit on RC and Cliffjumper behind them as they all fell and piled along the ground. Within a single minute, every single scraplet had been frozen solid. The swarm had been exterminated. The clouds began to clear and reveal a bright sunlight as RC and Cliffjumper looked in surprise. Even Optimus was stunned a bit. The cockpit of the Black Sutherland opened as Lelouch came out, the cold breeze brushing against his face with his cape and hair flowing back in the wind slightly. He smiled as he shook his head. "I'd invite you all in, but the place is a mess," he said to them as they all seemed confused slightly. Even Cliffjumper had been rendered speechless. Autobot Infirmary. Every single Autobot laid on large pads as they were all hooked up to monitors and IV-like devices, all with the exceptions of the undamaged Fix-It looking at his own handheld monitor, along with Optimus and Ratchet as they sat on some of the pads themselves. The Black Knights were the ones monitoring the Autobots' status via laptops that hooked up to the machines. Even Zero was helping as well, while he still wore his mask. Fortunately no one saw his face. "Report biocircuitry status," Ratchet instructed. "Levels are rising." Ogi gave a thumbs up. "Excellent." Ratchet nodded as he looked toward some of the other Black Knights. "Rai, keep a close watch on Bumblebee's electro-pulse monitor. Colin, check Bulkhead's interface patch. Inoue, maintain proper energon flow for Ironhide. Minami, keep watch over RC and Cliffjumper's defrosting process." "It's steady," Rai said. "Looking good." Colin told him. Flowing very nicely. Inoue said. They're both doing very well. Minami reported. And I have done a thorough scanning of the entire arc. Fix-It reported. There is not one scraplet remaining. Excellent news. Zero said. The Autobots should all make a full and swift recovery. Suddenly, Tamaki threw his arm around Zero's neck as he had a wide grin. Dude, what you just did was awesome. Tamaki praised. I gotta admit, I really didn't trust you all that much, but with that badass stunt you just pulled, I'm gonna tell ya right now, I don't care who's underneath that mask. Heck, I don't care if you're a couple of midgets in a bodysuit, I'll follow you all the way, buddy. Yeah, that was pretty amazing what you did, Zero. Ogi said with a smile as the other Black Knights began to praise their leader. Why didn't you just tell us what you were doing? Sugiyama asked. I apologize, there wasn't enough time. Zero said. Yeah well, still really awesome. Colin nudged his arm with a smirk. But I don't expect any less from you. As the other Black Knights complimented their leader, Zero spared a glance towards Rai as he smiled and nodded to his friend underneath the mask, while Lelouch smiled back. Optimus had a small smile as well as he saw this. He was not only impressed with what Lelouch did, but how he was able to earn the trust out of his fellow rebels. Perhaps one day, they could see him for who he was, for who laid behind that mask. Perhaps you should get some rest yourself, old friend. Optimus directed his attention toward Ratchet. You've saved quite a few lives today. Ratchet smiled a bit. It wasn't all my doing. He spared a glance to the humans who finished praising Zero as their masked leader helped them get back to monitoring the Autobots' status. We're just fortunate this infestation happened after we formed the Black Knights. Our human friends may be small, but they are strong. Optimus stated. Suddenly, Tamaki gave a high-pitched scream as all the Black Knights were put on high alert. Scraplet! Colin exclaimed as they readied themselves for anything. Spider! Tamaki exclaimed as everyone looked toward him in disbelief. Is it on me? Get it off me! He tried to brush it off as he ran out of the room while all the Black Knights and recovering Autobots honestly looked either dumbfounded or disappointed. Even Optimus and Ratchet looked towards each other in confusion as Colin smacked her palm into her forehead. Did he just scream like a little girl? Bulkhead questioned. Predatory. From the vast regions of space, a single ship flew through the void. It had flown for quite some time before coming towards a single planet, Earth. The ship had entered the Earth's atmosphere and flown toward the land formerly known as Japan, now Area 11. It flew above the region and crashed somewhere within the massive ecological forested area known as the Taiheyo Evergreen Forests, leaving a trail of destruction as it landed and skidded to a halt. It was the afternoon of the following delay as a ground bridge portal opened up in the same forest. RC was the first to walk out, followed by a red Glasgow piloted by a certain red-haired girl. Don't you think that's a bit excessive for recon? RC asked her partner for this mission. Hey, you never know if we run into Britannia out here. Colin stated from inside her nightmare. That happens, we call for backup. RC commented. This is only a recon mission, we're not looking for a fight. Yeah I know. Investigate this Meteor thing and see if it's anything dangerous before the bad guys get it. Colin brushed off. So, I don't think you'll be needing that. RC remarked to her red nightmare. Colin sighed as she knew RC had a point. So, she spotted an area where trees had fallen over and piled on top of a set of large rocks. She drove her nightmare to that spot and kneeled it down so that it could fit before she stepped out. Once Colin was on her feet, she was immediately pelted with mosquitoes. You know, Naoto used to take me and Ogi out to places like this before the occupation. Never could stand these oversized vampire bats. She tried to brush the bugs away. Least you got metal skin. RC smirked. Maybe, but nothing's worse than scraplets. Okay, got me there. Colin remarked. The scanner that RC was holding began to go off. That's odd. Ratchet's satellite scans were accurate, but simple meteors don't give off this kind of surge. What do you think it is? Colin asked. Let's find out. RC answered as the two walked deeper into the forest. As they walked, they came into a clearing to look in surprise as they saw a large pathway made from a crash. What happened here? Colin asked. Crash landing. RC got serious. Stay behind me, low and close. They moved along the tree line, following the trail of the crash. Still think I shouldn't have brought my nightmare? Colin questioned, keeping her hand trained on her pistol. Too much noise. RC responded as they followed along the trees, staying out of sight of any possible hostile eyes. Both of them crouched down as they spotted what they were looking for, a large Cybertronian vessel. It was much smaller than ships like the Ark or the Nemesis, but still pretty large to house a whole squadron. Bot or con? Colin questioned. Can't tell. Wait here. RC ordered as she readied an energon blaster in her hand and moved in slowly and quietly towards the downed craft. Colin watched her partner move closer until she was at the ship. She didn't like the idea of being left behind like this, but RC had more experience dealing with Decepticons, while Colin had none. Honestly, the only real Cybertronian threat she ever directly faced were the scraplets, but that's it. So, with reluctance, she stayed hidden behind a downed tree and watched as RC entered the vessel from the front. RC had her blaster at the ready as she slowly entered the open craft. She entered what appeared to be a hall and gave an audible gasp at what she saw. Severed alien heads, all preserved in cases, almost like what a human hunter would do with pelts and stuffed heads, only this felt much more sadistic. Colin looked in surprise to see RC actually stumble out of the ship. RC. She ran towards her partner. Once she was close, she didn't see that RC had any injuries and she didn't seem to hear any fights going on. So why did RC look so frightened? RC's mind went blank for a second as an unpleasant memory came to her. She remembered the image of a spider-like being, one made out of metal, and razor-sharp claws and teeth. RC. Colin's call brought her back to reality. RC, are you okay? What's going on? I know who this ship belongs to. RC grimaced before accessing her comms. RC to Ark, I need a ground bridge stat. What? Why? Whose ship is this? Colin questioned, but RC seemed to ignore the question as she couldn't get a response from her comlink. Ratchet. Fix it. Anybody. Do you read me? Still no response. Scrap. Comlink's dead. Ship's gotta be transmitting a high-frequency scrambler pulse. Colin did not like how RC was acting, it was starting to worry her a bit. Hey RC, you're really starting to freak me out here. What is going on? Wait here. RC told her before glaring into the forest. RC walked into the forests. It would appear that she was following some sort of trail. She even noticed some scratches along the trees, too big for any earth animal to cut. As she tried to find any trail on the ground, her mind suddenly flashed back again. She remembered herself being captured and held in a darkened chamber, being strung up by electric restraints, with a finger trailing along her face, one with some kind of acidic substance burning into her metal skin. RC. She was brought out of the memory by Colin again, who was starting to look more impatient than usual. But RC didn't give any response as she transformed into her vehicle mode. Climb on. With that order, Colin climbed onto the blue motorcycle before RC drove off at high speeds. Colin yelped in surprise but gripped the handles of the motorcycle to keep steady. Colin was beyond surprised just how fast RC was going and gave a loud scream as RC even leapt over a small cliff and continued to drive off. She was driving like a bat out of hell. Colin could tell that RC was scared, and that surprised her. What could be so bad to make someone like RC scared? She skidded to a halt. Colin tried to take a few breaths to calm herself from the sudden rush. Okay, what the hell was all that about? RC to Ark. Still no response. Use your phone, call for a ground bridge now. But why? What is? Just do it, RC shouted. Colin grumbled as she took out her phone and tried to call for help. Ogie, you there? All she got was static, so she tried another number. Rye. Still nothing. Cliffjumper. Anyone? She sighed. Nothing. Wait here. I mean it this time. RC insisted. No. Colin exclaimed. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell is going on. Whose ship was that? Why are you so freaked out? RC transformed before answering. All you need to know, the con who has that ship is dangerous. That's not enough, RC. Colin stated. I'm not a kid that you have to babysit. I'm a Black Knight, and I can handle myself. No, you can't. Not against her. RC then ran away before transforming back into her motorcycle form and drove off again, leaving Colin behind. Her. Colin questioned mentally. RC more than likely knew the Decepticon that ship belonged to, and from the sound of things, RC had a history with this, her. Well, whatever the case, Colin wasn't going to just stand around and do nothing. She was no child. With a hard glare, Colin ran in the direction RC went. RC drove off as fast and as far as she could. She probably wouldn't be able to contact the Ark and get reinforcements as long as that ship was emitting the pulse. Her only option was to hunt down the con herself. A part of her did feel bad leaving Colin behind like that, and she knew that Colin wasn't helpless, but the last thing she wanted was for the girl to be anywhere near her. She already suffered enough with the loss of her brother, and what her mother went through. The blue motorcycle came to a halt before RC transformed again and brought out her energon blaster before going on the hunt. Her target was definitely somewhere within these woods, no question. But she probably didn't know that RC was here too. Maybe it would be her chance to get the drop on her for once. The hunter would become the hunted. However, as RC walked, she heard a strange sound and turned to look in shock, almost horror, at the sight of a tree being melted away by some form of acidic substance. Flashback. It was the eve of the war for Cybertron. It was a war zone virtually everywhere you looked, yet despite that, RC kept a calm and confident stance as she ran past a battlefield as she contacted her squad. RC to Delta Team, requesting rendezvous points. Do you copy? RC, you lost again. Your sense of direction could use some improvement. Her friend and partner teased her over the comms. So does your aim, tailgate. RC teased back. If you tagged that snipper back at the artillery depot, I wouldn't have to break rank and engage the enemy hand to hand. From the sound of things, I'm guessing you came out ahead. Try waiting up this time and I'll give you the blow by blow. RC responded as she appeared to have made it out of the worst of it. What's your position? About half a click from the depot, due north. Tailgate responded. Think you can find it, partner. Trust me, Tailgate. My navigation abilities are. RC didn't get a chance to finish as she was suddenly pinned to a nearby wall by some form of web-like substance. She struggled but couldn't stop another patch of the same stuff from being shot to cover her face. The next thing RC knew, she was strung up by her arms via some form of electric bonds with her ankles webbed together. She struggled in her bonds, but they couldn't budge. She was effectively captured and secured. But she wasn't alone, someone else was with her. There was a female Decepticon as well. She had a black color scheme with glowing purple eyes and sharp claws on her hands. But what stuck out the most was a pair of spider leg-like appendages from her back. She walked around her captive, almost as if she was toying with her. Piece of advice, make yourself comfortable. The Decepticon told her as she showed off her extra appendages purely for intimidation. You're going to be here a while. She slowly traced her finger, which had an acidic substance at the tip, along RC's face, causing a burn mark to be etched into her cheek. Reality. The very same black Decepticon, the one that captured and tortured RC for a long time, was indeed on Earth, in these very same woods. She spotted what appeared to be a campsite at least 20 clicks away with her Cybertronian optics. My first local, she commented with a sinister smile. Time for humankind to feel my sting. She sprouted her spider legs and began to crawl with them along the ground, closer towards her prey. These appendages served as more than just intimidation for her foes. They were a way for her to quietly sneak up on her victim without being noticed, and they were deadly weapons as they were sharp enough to cut through even the strongest of metals. She was inching ever closer, and the closer she got, the more her urge intensified. She could already feel it, the sensation of organic fluids spilling over the ground as she gutted her prey, the feeling of the skin being removed from the body, the soothing sounds of the agonizing screams of terror, the look of hopelessness in their eyes before their life is snuffed out. No more waiting. She was about to jump towards her first victim when suddenly. Crash. Asterisk. RC leapt at her enemy from the ground and they both tumbled down a rocky hillside, far away from the unsuspecting victim that didn't appear to hear any commotion whatsoever. They tumbled further onto they came to a stop on flat ground, RC's back smacking against a cliffside and the Decepticon smacking off her and onto the hard ground. She got up with her spider legs to see the Autobot warrior who attacked her. RC, small universe. Too small, Arachnid. You're still holding a grudge. The Decepticon named Arachnid teased. The war's been over for mega cycles. Tell that to the Decepticons. RC stated as she took a combative stance. These days I travel solo, in pursuit of my new hobby. Arachnid said as she crawled around RC and a bit on the cliffside with her spider legs. RC's glare intensified. I gotta look at your souvenir case. She referred to the severed and preserved alien heads in Arachnid's ship. You mean my trophies? Arachnid replied. I collect endangered species. Of course, they aren't really endangered until they meet me. And I have a slot reserved for human. Not gonna happen. RC attacked. She ran and tackled Arachnid to the ground and was about to punch her, but Arachnid was able to push RC off with her spider legs. RC activated her energon blasters and opened fire at her hated enemy, but Arachnid avoided all the blasts and leapt in between a pair of trees, her spider legs keeping her in the air. She shot some form of webbing from her hands to bind RC's hands together and keep her from using her long-ranged weapons. But RC was able to pull on the strung webbing hard enough to pull Arachnid down to the ground. RC then used the sharp ends on her knees to sever the webbing as Arachnid stood back up and opened fire again. Arachnid swiftly dodged the attack and opened fire with red energon blasts from her palms, which RC ran to avoid. She ran closer to Arachnid and jumped up, grabbing onto a tree branch and spun herself to avoid more energon blasts before leaping higher onto another tree, which she jumped off of to fall and land a solid kick on Arachnid's face to knock her down and pin her to the ground. She aimed her energon blasters at the rogue Decepticon, ready to finish her once and for all. However, before any move was made, they both heard the sound of rocks sliding as they looked back at the hillside to see Colin sliding down toward the fight. RC gasped at the sight of her companion being here. Why was Colin here? Why now? Arachnid used this direction to lash one of her sharpened spider legs at RC to knock her back before getting up to shoot some more web and pin RC to the wall. RC. Colin was about to run and help. Arachnid turned to see the human girl and gave a joyous yet sadistic hiss. Colin was startled at the appearance of this particular Decepticon. Whoa. RC used this brief distraction as she brought out an arm blade to cut some of the webbing off, freeing her right arm, which she converted into an energon blaster to land a charged and direct hit on Arachnid to blast her back. Colin looked to see Arachnid fall before running to help RC. I told you to wait for me. She exclaimed to Colin. Yeah, well, partners don't ditch partners. Colin exclaimed as she tried to use her hands to pry the webbing off RC. Get this through your thick skull, Colin. You're not my partner, you're a liability. RC stated. No, I don't believe you and you know it's not true. Colin stated. I can see it in your eyes, RC, you're afraid. RC's look softened as Colin continued. You've charged head-on into war zones, taken on nightmares and cons alike without even blinking. I don't know what this, she-con did to make you so scared, but I'm not gonna sit back and watch you fight this thing alone. That's not what friends do. At that particular comment, a horrible memory, perhaps RC's worst memory, came back to her. Flashback. How long had RC been here, being tortured by the sadistic and cruel captor known as Arachnid? Hours. Days. Hard to tell, but it was going nowhere. She had endured so much physical trauma, yet RC didn't say a single word, other than the occasional curse or voice of defiance. Arachnid actually seemed impressed by her prisoner's tenacity. You know, for an Autobot, your reliance is quite impressive. RC offered no response. In fact, I'm guessing that no matter what I do to you, you'll never crack. Am I right? RC glared at her captor. That's what I thought. Arachnid actually smiled at that. But what came next, no one could expect. A pair of Viacon troopers entered the room, dragging in a certain Autobot that looked like he suffered quite the beating. RC's look of defiance gave way to shock and worry as she recognized this Autobot. Tailgate. Tailgate groaned as the Viacons dragged him next to RC and strung him up by his arms with the same electrical restraints that she was bound with. What have you done to him? RC exclaimed. Not much, yet. Arachnid warned. Just tell me what I want to know, or, well, you're a smart bot. I think you can imagine what happens to Tailgate, next. I don't know the attack coordinates. RC stated, causing Arachnid to frown and walk away. I swear upon the Allspark, it's the truth. We shall see. Arachnid said as she walked closer to Tailgate, her spider legs reeling back. No, please, RC begged. But it all fell on deaf ears as Arachnid gave a hiss before slashing with one of her legs, butchering her partner right in front of her eyes. Tailgate. Reality. RC's expression was one of absolute fear, not just from that horrible memory she'd never be able to forget, but the strong possibility of it repeating here and now. "You're right, Colin. I am afraid of losing you." That caught the red-haired girl by surprise as she looked at her partner with a shocked expression. "You sure have trouble hanging onto partners, don't you?" Arachnid taunted RC as she got back up. "We both know what happened to Tailgate, but I can't imagine how many more partners or teammates you lost when Cybertron went dark. At some point you really have to ask yourself, RC, is it them? Or is it me? Do you get it now, Colin?" RC told her human partner. "She's not interested in me, she hunts indigenous species, and she's on Earth. That means humans. You, run." Colin was shocked beyond belief but looked in even further surprise to see Arachnid web RC deeper onto the wall. So, with great reluctance, Colin took off and ran as fast as she could. Arachnid chuckled as she walked ever so close to RC. "And that's why I now prefer to work alone." She jammed one of her spider legs into the wall close to RC's face as she slowly danced around her. "It's so sad when bad things happen to those closest to you." She trailed her finger under RC's chin and crawled around RC, hanging upside down as she continued to taunt her. "But don't get me wrong, I fully intend to snuff out your spark. And believe me, I will make it hurt. But that won't compare to the pain you'll feel knowing I'm adding your little, Colin, to my collection." Colin had back run up the hillside. She looked back toward RC. There was no way she could help her like this. But maybe she could lure this Arachnid away and give RC time to escape, and they'd find a way to take her down. She glared at the Decepticon before running into the woods. RC could only look in terror as she saw Arachnid beginning her hunt. Colin. Night had now fallen over the forest as Colin continued to run. She took out her phone again only to see there was still no signal. "Great. Just great," she muttered to herself before turning back as she ran to see Arachnid slowly giving chase with her spider legs. "That's the spirit, Colin. Play hard to get," Arachnid teased as Colin glared at her, wanting nothing more to wipe that smug look off her face. Colin slid underneath a fallen tree and down a hillside. Once she was at the bottom, she quickly hid underneath a large set of rocks and fallen trees. She took a second to catch her breath. Okay, stay calm." Colin tried to calm herself down. What would Zero do? Or Optimus? She knew that either of them look at what tools they had first before making any sort of move. So, what did Colin have right now? All she had was a pistol, a handheld knife, and the key to her Glasgow. No way her gun or knife could take down a Decepticon. She had her nightmare, but in all the craziness, she forgot where she hid it. "Damn it," she uttered to herself and held her head back, only for the back of her head to bang against something hard and made of metal. Ow. She turned around only to look in surprise to see her Glasgow, right there. This was the same spot where she hid it. Huh, I'll be damned. She looked with a wide-eyed and blank expression before a smirk formed on her face. Arachnid continued to stalk and follow the trail. While she did lose sight of Colin, her trail was relatively easy to follow, so she had a good idea where to find her. Honestly though, this was turning out to be a disappointing hunt. "You're making this too easy, Colin, and I do not enjoy being bored." Arachnid called out to her, "Pray." Suddenly though, a flash of light shined brightly onto Arachnid's face, forcing her to cover her eyes, leaving her open for a powerful to come in and smash her across her face and send her skidding hard along the ground. "Well then, let me make it more exciting for you," Colin shouted from inside her Glasgow as she drove it straight at Arachnid, trying to land another punch, but Arachnid was able to jump back with an extra boost provided by her spider legs. However, the red Glasgow pulled out its rifle and opened fire on Arachnid, forcing her to leap into the trees and jump further back as Colin gave chase, a confident smirk forming on the girl's face. "Looks like the hunter has become the hunted." Arachnid however smirked as well. Maybe this hunt might be more interesting after all. Back with RC, she struggled as much as she could to escape the webbing, but no matter how hard she struggled, it wouldn't budge. She had to get out of here quick. Colin was a capable fighter, sure, but she had no idea what Arachnid was capable of. It was only a matter of time before that butcher cornered her and, just like with Tailgate, RC screamed in emotional agony as another memory resurfaced. Flashback. RC's face had given way from horror to despair as she had just witnessed Arachnid tear her partner, tailgate, to literal pieces. His parts and energon were all skewered over the ground. Not even scraplets were this brutal, and Arachnid smiled the entire time. Now it looked like it was Arcee's turn as Arachnid inched one of her clawed legs close to Arcee's face. There was no way to avoid this. However, just as she seemed to accept her imminent demise, the door was blown off its hinges. Arachnid growled in frustration before making her escape. Bumblebee quickly slid into the chamber and opened fire with his energon blasters, quickly killing the two Viacons before they could even react. Cliffjumper ran in as well as he quickly came towards Arcee. He was able to free her from her restraints as she fell to her knees, her despair and fear still deep inside her. Bumblebee came over to help as they picked up Arcee and began to carry her out. I couldn't save him. I couldn't save my partner. Reality. Colin, I'm sorry. I should have never looked back. Arcee sobbed. I should have. Her eyes winded in realization. Kept driving. Arcee used what physical strength she had to push forward, pushing on the webbing, before transforming and putting her vehicle mode into high gear. Now was not the time to get upset about the past. She had to get out and help Colin as soon as possible. She already lost one partner to that monster, she was not about to lose another. Arachnid jumped from tree to tree, avoiding the gunfire from Colin's Glasgow as she rolled after her. Arachnid stopped at the fourth tree and tried to shoot back with her palm lasers, but Colin turned her Glasgow so it rolled sideways, using the trees for cover that got shot down from Arachnid's blasts. Colin then shot her Glasgow's right/Harkin at the tree Arachnid was on, causing it to tip over, but Arachnid had jumped off and used her spider legs to stabilize her landing. The spider-like Decepticon shot some webbing at the Glasgow's feet to halt its advance, but Colin wasn't about to give Arachnid any openings as she threw out a Chaos Mine, previously used on a Sutherland stolen by the Black Knights. Colin braced herself as the mine opened in the air to blast shrapnel in every direction. Arachnid got hit by several pieces, but nothing too damaging as she jumped back and onto a tree, crawling her way up towards the top just as the Chaos Mine stopped its attack. The shrapnel from the mine was able to shred the webbing around the Glasgow's feet. Though there was some damage to its hull, it was still functional. Colin looked around to see Arachnid had vanished. Sneaky bitch, she uttered to herself as she slowly rolled her nightmare through the woods, keeping her eyes out for the Khan who was still somewhere nearby. Arachnid had found cover within the leaves as she assessed her bleeding cuts. It wasn't anything too serious, but it still hurt. This seemed to anger her a bit, but also, she felt herself somewhat intrigued. That's quite the interesting toy you got there. Arachnid called to Colin. It's a rare feat to catch me off guard. You'll find I'm full of surprises. Colin's voice shot through the Glasgow speakers. I'm not going to be easy prey for you. As Colin looked around, she couldn't find the voice of Arachnid as she continued to speak. I can see why Arcee likes you, you remind me so much of how she used to be. Such confidence, so much fire in your eyes. Seeing how you two seem so close, did she ever tell you about me? You're a Decepticon, that's all I need to know. Colin replied as she continued to search, her Glasgow's weapons at the ready. She heard an echo of Arachnid's chuckle high in the trees. Haven't you heard what Arcee said? These days I travel alone. The whole reason I even signed on with Megatron's little crusade was because he gave me the opportunity to do things I couldn't do before. I was his chief torturer. Whenever prisoners had valuable information, they were brought to me, and I made sure to squeeze every last drop of intel out of them. Colin's teeth gnashed a bit, having a good idea what that meant. She was really starting to hate Arachnid now. Did she ever tell you about Tailgate? Arachnid asked, still hiding in the trees. Arcee was brought to me for my usual round of interrogation. But unlike most other bots I had the pleasure of dismembering, she kept her mouth shut, no matter what I did to her. I really have to admire that kind of resolve. But then I realized her true weakness, the same weakness most other Autobots have, they care about their friends. Colin stopped moving for a second as Arachnid continued to speak. Arcee's partner Tailgate was brought to me. She continued. That's when her resolve began to break. She even begged me to stop, but I didn't. And I tore poor Tailgate apart, piece by piece. Instinctively, Colin fired her Glasgow's rifle into the treetops, trying to shoot down Arachnid wherever she was hiding. But she couldn't find her. Arachnid however smirked from her vantage point, knowing she got to her prey. But you know what I found most interesting? Arachnid continued. On my way here, I've actually picked up some interesting Decepticon radio chatter about a small group of Autobots recruiting some humans to their side. What was it they were called again? Oh, that's right, the Black Knights. Colin was practically seething at this constant chatter. Can I assume you're one yourself? Damn right I am, Colin shouted. No, come out and fight me. Colin shot her /Harkins at several trees to knock them down, but she still couldn't find Arachnid. My, quite the temper you have. Arachnid continued to taunt. So, tell me, much like RC, can I assume there's someone in your little group you're particularly close to? Colin's eyes widened as she instinctively thought of Ogi, Naoto's best friend, and something of a second older brother to her. She also thought of Rai, a close friend in both school and the Black Knights, who knew her true self and accepted her with open arms. She even thought of Zero, though she didn't know his true identity. He went to such lengths to not only help her and everyone else, but even helped her mother when she needed it. You're not trying to deny anything, which must mean I'm right. Arachnid said as she slowly lowered herself toward the ground, quietly climbing down a tree behind the Glasgow before silently landing on the ground. So, good news for you. I won't kill you, I'll keep you alive, so that you can tell me everything you know about those closest to you. Only for you to watch. Arachnid was directly behind the Glasgow, ready to rip it to pieces. As I slowly sliced them to pieces. She lulled. Colin's eyes widened as her pupils seared with anger. She put her nightmare in full reverse and slammed the acceleration, causing it slam back into Arachnid, catching the Decepticon off guard. While still moving, Colin turned the front half of her Glasgow and grabbed Arachnid by her throat, driving into and slamming Arachnid into multiple trees as she yelled and pushed forward. You won't touch any of them. Colin yelled at the top of her lungs. Do you hear me? After the 10th shattered tree, Colin's Glasgow tossed Arachnid onto a rock, and the girl slammed her nightmare onto the con to pin her to it. She glared hatefully at the Decepticon. There was no way she'd let this monster hurt any of her friends, both in the Black Knights and even those from Ashford, or even her mother. I won't let you hurt anyone else. *****. Colin had been so focused on Arachnid, that she failed to notice her spider-like legs that quickly shot from her and sliced off both the Glasgow's arms. Colin's eyes widened in shock as she instinctively backed her nightmare up and watched as Arachnid managed to pull herself up. Another thing you and RC seem to have in common. Arachnid said with a triumphant and evil smirk. You let your emotions get the better of you. She shot some web forward to pin the Glasgow's feet to the ground once more. Getting desperate, Colin fired off her nightmare's only weapons, the /Harkins, but they both missed as Arachnid jumped with her spider legs and landed onto the Glasgow, while simultaneously using two of her spider legs to sever the feet off the nightmare, where the Decepticon butcher pinned what was left of the nightmare to the ground. Colin gasped in audible fear as Arachnid slowly began to tear the Glasgow apart. She even began to tear the cockpit open and saw Colin's frightened face. So, tell me Colin, where's that fire now? Arachnid taunted. Instinctively, Colin took out a flare gun on the cockpit's side, thinking it was a real gun and shot it in Arachnid's face. The light flashed as the flare exploded, temporarily blinding Arachnid as Colin pulled on the ejector and what was left of the cockpit shot out from the remains of the Glasgow. The front end had been torn off and Colin watched as her pod had flown far away from Arachnid, but it was damaged and quickly fell before skidding hard on the ground. Colin gasped but kept a firm grip on her seat to keep herself from flying out before the cockpit finally came to a halt. Colin took a few deep breaths to collect herself before she undid her seatbelt and climbed out of the cockpit and tried to get even further distance away, still holding onto the flare gun as she ran. Arachnid groaned and rubbed her face before her vision began to clear. She looked in the direction where the cockpit had shot before resuming her hunt. RC pushed her vehicle mode as fast as it could possibly go, trying to tear through the persistent webbing. It didn't seem like she was making any sort of progress, but some of the strands were already beginning to snap. She had to keep pushing, for Colin. With one final push, RC was able to finally break free. She drove off as fast as she could, hoping beyond hope that she wasn't too late. Colin ran as fast as she could. She was sure she made some considerable distance with her ejection, but she didn't want to turn back and see if Arachnid was still waiting. It was no wonder the Autobots told her and the other Black Knights to be cautious against the Decepticons. Just one of them tore her Glasgow apart like a cheap toy. She continued to run, honestly having no idea where she was going. Right now, all the weapons she had were still a simple pistol, a knife, and a flare gun. Why did she even bring that with her? Maybe to signal RC. But that would give away her location to Arachnid too. Colin had to stop and hide behind a tree to catch her breath. She honestly never felt more scared in her life. She let Arachnid get to her with those words, and she destroyed her most valuable weapon against her. She could tell that Arachnid was enjoying this. While she will say that she was scared right now, she was also eager to get rid of Arachnid. If she found out about her personal life, she shuddered to think what Arachnid would do to her friends on the student council at Ashford, or even her own mom. Oh Colin. She heard Arachnid sign in the distance. Come out, wherever you are. Damn it. Colin thought to herself. What could she do? As Colin looked at the symbol on her uniform's shoulder, the emblem that symbolized the union of the Autobots and the Black Knights, her fists clenched as determination soon began to fill in her. I don't have time to be scared right now. I'm a Black Knight, aren't I? That means fighting to protect those who can't protect themselves. I didn't give in to Britannia, and I'm not about to give up now. I need to find a way to take this bitch out once and for all. As Colin looked around, she spotted on her left the site of Arachnid's crashed ship. Maybe that had something she could use. So, she made a break for the ship as fast as she could. After sliding down a small slope, she made it down to the front of the ship where she saw RC enter before. Arachnid was still some distance away, but Colin had to move fast as she ran inside. The minute she ran and entered the halls, she gasped at the sight of all the severed and preserved alien heads decorating the wall. She covered her mouth as she honestly felt like she was about to throw up but swallowed the bile back down. This con was all kinds of sick. She shook her head to push those thoughts out of her head. Okay, what can I use here? She tried to think. I still don't know a whole lot about Cybertronian tech, but, wait, this ship crashed, didn't it? Maybe something was damaged outside. I could probably use that. Colin was about to run out and back down the ramp, but as she looked to her right, she saw the figure of Arachnid in the distance. Colin quickly hopped over on the other side of the ramp and underneath a mound of dirt. It didn't look like Arachnid spotted her. She saw some rocks by her feet and got an idea. Now, where did you scamper off to? Colin heard Arachnid muttering to herself. She was almost directly over her. Colin quickly picked up a rock and threw it into the open doorway inside the ship. Arachnid turned at the sound of something inside her ship and smirked. If you wanted a tour, Colin, all you had to do was ask. Arachnid shifted her lower body to show her natural legs as she walked inside. Did you spot the empty space? I hope you'll like it. It's where you'll soon hang your head. Colin ran alongside the side of the ship. She smirked as Arachnid fell for it, but it won't take her long to realize she'd been tricked. Colin had to find something fast. As Colin ran toward the back, she jumped and slid down a mound of dirt and felt her foot stick into something wet. She looked down to spot a blue puddle at her feet. Sakuradite. No, Energon. Colin remembered how they were the same thing as she turned toward the ship's engines to see some liquid energon leaking. Guess the engines were damaged. Hey, wait a minute. Energon was highly explosive, wasn't it? She looked towards her flare gun and smirked. Arachnid looked around the inside of her vessel but couldn't find Colin. Where are you, Colin? Arachnid didn't see her anywhere. But if she wasn't in the ship, where was she? Her optics slightly widened, realizing she'd probably been tricked and ran back outside. Colin aimed the flare gun and pulled the trigger. She made a run for it as she turned her head to see the red flare hitting the spot where she needed it, right in a puddle of energon inside a damaged engine. Arachnid had made it outside and climbed to the top of her ship to see Colin running away. Hope you're packed for the heat, spider bitch. Colin called to Arachnid. The spider-like Decepticon looked down in confusion to that statement, only for her optics to widen in horror as she saw the flames spreading through the liquid energon and into her ship's engines. Colin. Boom. Asterisk. Colin was blown away by the shockwave from the explosion that completely obliterated Arachnid's ship. She was blown at least 20 feet and had a rough landing but made it out in one piece. She got up on her hands and feet and turned around at the sight of the ship's remains burning. She breathed a huge sigh of relief, before a smile formed on her face and she even laughed slightly. Who's the prey now, huh? Colin chuckled before she stood triumphantly. Don't mess with a Black Knight. Colin then got up and began to walk away. She just killed her first Decepticon, she couldn't wait to tell Zero, Ogie, Rai, and everyone else back at the Ark. But first, she had to find RC and, Colin suddenly felt something on her foot, sticking her to the ground. She looked in horror to see it was webbing. No way. Yes way. Colin was then webbed to a tree, her arms stuck to her sides and the trunk of the tree as she looked upward, her pupils shrinking at the sight of Arachnid. Half of her body was on fire, and her metal skin did appear damaged, but she was still very much alive, and very angry. Arachnid climbed down onto the ground and marched her way to Colin as she tried desperately to free herself from the web, but the sadistic alien was already on top of her. Arachnid smiled evilly as she felt her fingers along Colin's face. She was going to enjoy every single second of this. The girl was ready to scream in terror, but a pair of lights shined on them and Colin's salvation came in the form of RC as her vehicle mode came in at high speeds before she transformed, and used the momentum from the speed she built up, to deliver a palm strike right to Arachnid's face to knock her back several yards. RC wasn't about to give Arachnid even a second to recover as she quickly ran in to deliver a kick to her enemy's chest. RC went on the offensive with a punch. Arachnid tried to punch back, but RC blocked it and delivered another punch to her chest and a slug across her face before spinning around to deliver a fierce kick to knock Arachnid back more. RC then converted both her hands into energon blasters and charged up a powerful shot before blasting it, hitting Arachnid and sending her flying through dozens of trees, leaving a trail of destruction behind her. Arachnid fell down in defeat. Her previous battle with Colin's Glasgow and getting caught up in the explosion of her own ship had already weakened her significantly, but that last attack from RC was all that was needed to finish the fight. With Arachnid disposed of, RC quickly ran towards her friend. Colin, are you okay? She pried the webbing off to free Colin from the binds. Yeah, I'm fine. Colin said in between breaths. All fear was gone now as she looked up to her savior. RCI, thank you. She said with an honest smile and gratitude filled in her eyes. RC smiled back, but both their smiles faded as they heard a loud drilling sound from behind. They both quickly ran to see Arachnid's spider-like legs pointed downward as her body spun rapidly like a drill. She was quickly burrowing underground to escape. RC tried to shoot her, but by the time she and Colin got close enough, Arachnid was already too far deep. Arachnid. RC growled and called to her hated enemy, but she was long gone. The blue Autobot gave a deep and regretful sigh. So much for closure. Now she's stuck here on Earth, and in Japan of all places. Colin said, considering she just blew up Arachnid's ship. Yeah, that's probably gonna come back and bite us in the ass someday. Colin, I'm sorry you had to face my demons today. RC said honestly. Well, you helped me face mine with my mom and refrain and all that, so I'd say we're even. Colin tried to smirk, but it quickly vanished. She also told me what she did to Tailgate. RC's face contorted one of grief once that name was spoken. To have someone you care about taken from you by someone that cruel, that evil. Just You can't help but think about what happened to Naoto. RC assumed. Yeah. Colin lowered her head. I even saw it myself. And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think how I could have saved him. RC knew exactly what that felt like. She kneeled down and patted her companion on the back. I feel the same way. But as much as we like, we can't change the past. But you know what I do when I miss my friends who are gone. What? Colin slowly glanced towards RC as the Autobot smiled. I remember all the friends that I still have with me today. She answered. And that's why I keep fighting, to protect them and make sure nobody else goes through the same thing. Colin smiled as she rubbed some mist in her eyes. She felt exactly the same way. She did have many good friends, and family, people she was fighting for. Fighting to make the world a better place for them. Yeah, I got a lot of friends. And you're one of them. RC stood up with her smile still on her face as she was finally able to contact the Ark again. Ratchet, requesting ground bridge. Colin smirked, she was more than ready to go home after this. But an irritated look formed on her face as she spotted a mosquito near her arm, which she promptly squashed with her hand. Need to get my partner far away from any oversized insects. RC joked. Colin looked up to RC with a smirk and a raised eyebrow. Partner, huh? Junior partner. I can still pull rank. RC teased just as the sun began to rise and shine upon the two freedom fighters and sisters in arms. And this is the end of part 6 of this What If. Do not forget to leave a comment down below and subscribe to this channel.